Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie w imieniu Fundacji imienia biskupa Tadeusza Pieronka, która po jego śmierci stała się głównym organizatorem tego już trwającego ponad dwie dekady przedsięwzięcia. Konferencja Rola Chrześcijan, jak ona się dzisiaj nazywa, w procesie integracji europejskiej, w tym roku ma swoją 22. edycję. Bardzo się cieszę, że wraz z naszymi tradycyjnymi współorganizatorami, których loga widnieją na ekranie, frakcją Europejskiej Partii Ludowej w Parlamencie Europejskim, z delegacją polską we frakcji, z fundacją Roberta Schumana w Luksemburgu, a także fundacją Konrada Adenauera, którą na powrót witamy w gronie współorganizatorów i bardzo się cieszymy, oraz COMECE, Komisją Episkopatu Unii Europejskiej, udaje nam się otworzyć kolejną 22. konferencję. Tytuł jej Wojna w Europie, jaka będzie Unia Europejska, wskazuje na to, że w tym roku jeszcze bardziej niż w poprzednich latach będziemy rozmawiali o kryzysie. O kryzysach i to dość radykalnych. O tym, jak kościoły reagują na agresję rosyjską w Ukrainie. O tym, jak sfera informacji, która tradycyjnie bywa in the area of information. This is a traditional sphere of competition and conflict. In this day and age, more than before, it has become a place where war is waged. Also, we will discuss how all these events are impacting the process of migration. Istniejących już od szeregu lat przyczyn tego zjawiska doszła w Europie reasons of migrations. Now we have this terrible war in Europe. Okolicznościach, w których z uwagi właśnie na to, co powiedziałem i co wszyscy wiemy, będzie musiała zmieniać się Unia Europejska, jak wygląda perspektywa jej rozszerzenia. Przypominam sobie, że the EU o którym świadczy tutaj ten fotel i róża, który nie jest z nami fizycznie. W tym momencie pewnie powiedziałby mi, żebym już kończył, bo on bardzo nie lubiał gadnictwa. And he would tell me, come on, wrap it up, because he didn't like Barrios. So I will just say, this is the moment when the role of the Christians, the process of European integration, when this 22nd edition is opened. May I ask Jan Olbrycht, MEP, to take the floor, then the head of the Robert Schuman Foundation, Oomen-Ruijten, and the secretary of COMECE,
Prieto,
Father
Manuel,
Prieto, and
also we shall have a special guest,
namely President Roberta Metsola. And before she takes the floor, I will ask Mr. Olbrycht to actually announce her address.
Eminencjo, księże metropolito,
Your Eminence, Metropolitan Bishop, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, senators, many excellent people that I cannot name here, all of you, but I'm really happy to see you. I'm happy that we can be here together. The president of the Schuman Foundation, my colleague from the European Parliament, long-standing colleague. Today I'm wearing two hats. Firstly, I speak on behalf of the EPP, on behalf of Alfred Weber. There are two of us here. We stepped in for the head of the political group. Ms. Naviciana from Lithuania is here, a very important person, a former president of defense of Lithuania. She will discuss things that are linked to what is happening in Ukraine. So together we are here to state that the EPP, our group in the European Parliament, is not only financing this event, but it's also a very important political event for us. It's actually highlighting how we are approaching the future of Europe and European issues at large. Look at the title. The title is not what the EU is going to be after the war, what the European Union will be like, full stop. That's the title. We, European politicians, and many of us present here, simply do not know that. We don't know what the EU will be like in the future. We don't know how successful Putin will be. We don't know to what extent he's successful at splitting the European solidarity. This is what we're going to discuss here. We will also talking about the impact, the fallout of this tragic attack on Ukraine. In our group, in the APP, we've been discussing just that. We're talking about what the future of the EU is. Is it going to survive this type of pressure? Will people be tired of that, or shall we persist and persevere in our trust and solidarity? Now, our group is responsible for the constant dialogue with religious groups and churches. I have this honor to chair the group that deals with just that. We have this ongoing dialogue. And for that reason, we have this familiarity, friendship, if I may say so, with the representatives of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine. We have been supporting them. We've been rooting for them, if I might say so, to change this optics in Ukraine. But we have also been cooperating with them very closely. I'm really happy that we are here together, because we have been together throughout this change that took place in the Ukrainian Church. We shall discuss that today. And this is what our group deals with, but also represent the Polish delegation in this political group in the European Parliament. Andrzej Halicki was supposed to take the floor. He's in Weimar right now, and he's trying to rebuild the Weimar Triangle relationship with the French and German colleagues. It is something that cropped up quite suddenly, and he asked me to apologize for his absence. We, the Polish delegation, and the people who have been in this delegation, Central Pilch, actually did also act as the Minister of Defense, so a number of those Ministers of Defense present here. So we, the Polish delegation in the European Parliament, have been doing that. And today I need to say that we have been supporting not only our dialogue with churches, but also the dialogue about solidarity and values, mutual solidarity, and to support the EU as an entity that is indispensable to all of us. So I'm speaking on the whole group and the Polish delegation too. And in this capacity, I would like to welcome you and say that I'm happy to meet you here. I hope that this cooperation will continue throughout the year. Thank you.
So, dear all, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be in Krakow. And if we discuss what are the consequences, it's not good? It's better now? Okay. So I have to start again? No. Dear all, if we we are looking at the theme of this conference. What are the consequences of the war of Europe? The war in Europe, the war in Ukraine. What is meant by solidarity? Then I'm also happy to be here in Krakow, because it's not known to everybody that, I heard it yesterday from the taxi driver, but today it's confirmed by my colleagues. I heard that 8% of the population of Krakow is stemming from Ukraine. So that is what solidarity means. 80,000 people are here welcomed by this city and by the citizens. So if there is an applause, then that would be an applause for the city, for the citizens of this beautiful town. Yesterday night and also this morning, we had our former interns of the Robert Schuman Foundation. We had them all in Brussels. And besides of what they stated, it was good for their career, their lives, to have this day in Belgium, at the European Union. But we had also very good discussions on Ukraine, on enlargement, and the rule of law. We had in our midst a strong Ukrainian delegation of young men and young women. They were at the midst of the debate. And it was my former colleague, Stolian, who explained the whole process of enlargement. That was very good to see it once on paper, and I'm sure that he will forward everything what he has debated. But what also was interesting was the conclusion of his debate, when he said, you have to know and you have to recognize that Ukrainians are defending our European values. And I think that is what the consequence is of this war, for the Ukrainians and also for the Europeans. The debate from this morning with the interns was concluded by former President Horst Langes. And if there is anything what has to be known to all of us, that even when on the 2nd of December he will reach the age of 94, he is still a very strong, a very convinced European. So please applause for Horst Langes. Let me conclude by saying that I'm absolutely happy that you are all here, but happy that it is also such a high-ranking public which we have now here in Krakow. Members of the European Parliament, former members of the European Parliament, personalities from the church, from society, from universities, but we all will discuss today, together with those personalities, what is the European future on when one of the countries, many of the citizens are at this time in war. So I hope that we will have a good discussion and that we will go home afterwards and spreading the news and everything what was discussed today. So welcome also on behalf of the Schuman Foundation. Thanks a lot.
Good morning to all. I am Manuel Barrios, the General Secretary of COMECE, and cordial greetings to all of you from the Commission of the Bishops' Conference of the European Union. COMECE is a long-standing partner of this important conference, which offers a space for dialogue on pressing issues of concern to the European Union and to the Church. And COMECE will stay being a partner in this conference. This year's edition of the conference is dedicated to the theme that worries us all, the ongoing war in Ukraine and its implications for the European Union. At the recent plenary we had in COMECE, the autumn plenary last week, the bishops of COMECE issued a heartfelt appeal for peace in Ukraine and in the whole of Europe. They expressed, and I quote, their sadness at the horrible human suffering inflicted on the people of Ukraine by the brutal military aggression initiated by the Russian authorities. And they also expressed, the bishops of Europe, their deep concern that recent actions may risk a further expansion of the war with disastrous consequences for humanity. They called on the aggressors to immediately suspend the hostilities and to all parties to open themselves up to negotiation of serious proposals for a just peace, working towards a solution to the conflict which respects international law and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And here I end the quote of the bishops of COMECE last week in their plenary assembly. The bishops of COMECE also recognized the impact of the war in Ukraine on all of us as European citizens, particularly those who find themselves in increasingly dramatic socio-economic hardship due to the energy crisis, rising inflation, and the soaring cost of living. It is in times of crisis, like the current one, that we can fully realize the deep value of the European Union and its founding vision. Peace on the European continent was taken for granted for a long time. And the values enshrined in Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union were too often used as empty and abstract references stripped of their original meaning. The words of Cardinal Ulrich, the president of COMECE, during the opening of last year's Krakow conference, I think we remember them, reminding us of the need for a solidification of our value system, can be seen. We greet Roberta Metsola, just arrived. Good morning. So it is in times of crisis, like the current one, that we can fully realize the deep value of the European Union and its founding vision. Peace on the European continent was taken for granted, and I think many of us also have taken it for granted for a long time. And the values enshrined in Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union were too often used as empty and abstract references, stripped of their original meaning. The words of Cardinal Ulrich, the president of COMECE, during the opening of last year's Krakow conference, I think we remember them, reminded us of the need for a solidification of our value system. Can be seen today, these words of Cardinal Ulrich as prophetic for our times, which call for concrete expression of the values of solidarity, human dignity, freedom, justice, democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. In response to the war in Ukraine and its consequences, including the millions of refugees who have been forced to leave their homes, especially the most vulnerable, women and children. This is also a moment of change for Europe and the European Union. The military aggression against Ukraine has brought a new momentum into the EU enlargement policy, with 3 more countries, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, joining the waiting room, together with the countries of the West Balkans, for a future EU membership as candidates or potential candidates. Realizing the strategic importance of EU enlargement for stability, prosperity, and peace on the European continent, the European Union and the Member States will now have to deliver on their promises to uphold a credible EU enlargement process in order not to disappoint the expectations of the citizens in the candidate countries. Because frustrations with lacking progress towards a future EU accession may facilitate the luring of the countries towards international actors that do not always want the good of our continent. All at the same time, however, the European Union may also need to undergo an in-depth reflection on possible political, financial, and institutional reforms before being able to fully absorb new members. Part of this reflection should also be a reminder that the European Union is not merely a geographical area or an economic reality. It is above all a project of peace and a value-based community of people. The current situation requires a strong sense of European unity. The EU's cohesion is closely linked with the resilience of national institutions and democracies. We have to be conscious of the high interest of certain global players in trying to destabilize and polarize our societies through disinformation campaigns and other means. A vanishing cohesion at the EU and national levels will prove disastrous on many fronts for all peoples living in Europe. Just to think of the possible consequences if the unity in solidarity with Ukraine and its people would diminish, or its concerted actions to tackle socio-economic inequalities and raising poverty in all its forms, including access to affordable energy, were weak. The issue of social unrest cannot be underestimated. Europe and the world seem to be at a crossroad. As Pope Francis encourages us, even in the night of the war that is falling upon humanity, we should not allow the dream of peace to fade. The difficult situation we are currently experiencing may also give birth to a new Europe, a Europe of values and not of particular interests, a Europe of open arms and not walls, a Europe for which human dignity, justice, freedom and democracy are not just empty words, but fundamental principles on which a peaceful and prosperous future can be built. A Europe that is not closed in itself, but open to further enlargement. A Europe that assumes its responsibility in ensuring security without reinforcing armament dynamics. A Europe that does not rely on a mentality of fear, but cherishes a culture of encounter and peace. It is my hope, and I finish with this, it is my hope that this year's conference may once again provide a constructive and fruitful contribution to the process of renewing the European project of peace and helping Christians to rediscover their important role in the process of further advancing the European integration. Thank you very much.
Szanowni Państwo, ze względu na szacunek wobec...
Ladies and gentlemen, because of our respect for Madam President of the European Parliament, and actually she was not able to get her headphones at the beginning, a few words in English therefore.
All the guests, participants of the conference. This is a very rare occasion to meet one of the most important politicians in Europe. Maybe some of you remember last year we had the honor to welcome here in this room member of European Parliament from Malta, and who came to our conference and took part in the debate about the justice system, about democracy in Europe. This was last year. So many things happened during this year. So many problems in Europe, completely new challenges. Roberta Metsola became the President of European Parliament, someone from the very small country. This is a proof that in the European Union, it's not the size of the country which really counts, but the quality of politician. Of course, also the importance of the political group, but even in the group, it's important who will be elected, who will be nominated. We were very happy that we agreed as EPP to propose Roberta, and it was very, very broadly accepted in the Parliament. And after some months, you can say that she, Madam President, became one of the most important personalities in Europe. Please remember, because this is, and I must say, if you allow me, Roberta, this is not the end. So we know you're ambitious, and I think that the future is yours. And we will wait what will be the next steps. And just very privately, please remember that President of the European Parliament yesterday, some days ago, she was in Strasbourg. Yesterday, she was in Brussels for the meeting of the summit of the prime ministers, heads of the governments, yesterday. She came to Krakow for 3 or 4 hours. She came just for this conference. This is very exceptional for a politician of such importance to go to the country, to go to the city, to meet the people, to make the speech, and immediately go to France, because Roberta is leaving today to France. So she came especially for us. And because she knows that we were waiting for her, and she knows that she has friends here. The friends who can trust her, and the friends who can support all the efforts she's making. And now, European Parliament tradition. Ladies and gentlemen, President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola.
Thank you very much, Jan. You are right in saying that when I came here last year, I was just looking at my calendar, it was on the 29th of October. I was so impressed both by the quality of the organization, but also the depth and integrity of the content and the speakers. And these are very rare occasions for someone who, as you just said, I have to travel between one country and another. I actually have to go to another country before I go to France tonight, so I'm doing a little bit of country hopping. But the possibility of being with you today in order to exchange my thoughts and hopefully also in order for you to express what you want to see from the current European Union and its leadership in a year where everything has changed, everything. I was elected on the 18th of January. On the 24th of February, Russia invaded Ukraine. Who would have told us? Who would have told us that after such a difficult, exhausting battle with a global pandemic, we would be facing an escalating war in Ukraine, with cost of living prices inexorably worrying all our people, and Europe facing such an uncertain winter. But last year we also were discussing the importance of values and principles in every crisis. Ambassador Tompinski is nodding. You were there here. Yes, you were here with your daughters last year, I remember. The the importance of values in every decision that you take. Yesterday, I was around the table with the prime ministers of all countries, members of the European Union. And my appeal to them was this, that the decisions will be hard, decisions will be costly, decisions will be difficult to explain, and citizens want us to cushion them from the impact. But now is the time for more Europe rather than less. We learned that during the pandemic, unprecedented decisions that for years we said should be done on the national level, but it is because we learned that is why we are pushing for here as a parliament for that more Europe to translate into decisions that leaves no member state alone. Each member state, irrespective of size, economic situation, industry heavy, renewables leader or not, has its own reality. But at the end of the day, those values that we, and I come from a country that joined the European Union on the same day as yours, those values that we fought for years in order to convince our citizens to agree, are the same values that for millions and millions of Ukrainians today, of Moldovans, and also of Georgians, not to forget the Western Balkans, are all they look at. Elections are won and lost on the basis of these values and principles. Wars are fought and won on the basis of these principles. I'm going to go back to my speech now because I've just deviated a little bit. So, when we're talking about current geopolitical challenges, these really invite us to reflect on what matters most to us and to reflect on how together, as a community, we can shoulder each other to weather storms and hardship ahead, to strengthen the so-called European construction, a big word, but at the end of the day, very simple, and European solidarity. Without this, we cannot only appeal to economic interests and financial gains. We must nurture and defend authentic values and a universal moral law that is at the heart of every human being. In 1999, Pope John Paul II said, "If Europe were to mistakenly equate the principle of tolerance and respect for all with ethical indifference and skepticism about indispensable values, it would be embarking on an extremely dangerous path on which, sooner or later, the most terrifying spectres of its past would reappear in a new form." Values matter, and they matter in politics, they matter in leadership, and they matter to the European Parliament, where Jan, Raza, and I work. It is our values that drive our decision-making in Ukraine and on Ukraine, why we understand that Ukraine is defending our way of life and why we must keep helping. When our European way of democracy and value-based politics are being called increasingly into question, my answer is always this, that is when precisely we need to double down on our values. Because today, the world needs leaders more than ever. It needs people who understand the importance of altruism, the importance of serving others, and the importance of standing up for your beliefs. There is virtue in leadership as there is in service. I was brought up in a family that taught me this. My parents taught me and my sisters this. And as a Christian Democrat politician, It is the decisions that guard or guide everything that I do. Leadership is about strengthening our community, about leaving no one behind, about understanding that the common good is greater than the one of the individual, about realizing that we are not safe until we are all safe, that the weakest and marginalized are as much of our community as you and I. We must hear them and include them to grow as societies and as communities. I am proud of the European Union, of what it has accomplished in bringing prosperity to all communities across the stretches of its geography, of how it is learning to set aside nationalist egoism to focus on the greater picture and the benefits of not doing it alone. I'm also proud of the work of the European Parliament, which I don't only have the privilege but the responsibility of leading. It is a unique institution. If you don't work inside it, you can have many opinions about how it works. But once you are inside it, it is one of the most beautiful expressions of democracy that we have, I would say, across the world. Because it is an expression directly of the people of Europe. It truly shows that we can work together in a way that respects diverse opinions, ideologies, religions, languages, and nations, but all while remaining anchored in our core shared values. Of course, it's not always easy. It is definitely not easy to balance out multiple opinions, both across political differences, but also across nationalities. We bring together members from 27 member states. It is not easy to agree on how to tackle diverging energy supply needs and different perceptions of the heavy, heavy threat of war. And of course we argue, of course we debate, and of course we discuss. But is that not the case of all families? In our parliament, like in our Europe, it is the strength of our arguments and belief in our community that matter, not individual nationalism. And today, more than ever, we need to reflect on how we can transmit this message and our core values to a generation that may be losing balance and orientation, shaken by crises that consume us. These days we see ever so more short-termism, politicians who only look to save their own seat in the next election and not in the one after that and the one after that, for the countries that require citizens to really believe in their politicians and their political leaders. That politics is a force for good. That in 2024, we have 4 countries in the European Union where 16-year-olds will vote for the first time. Our responsibility is to make sure that they are encouraged to vote, to choose their representatives. And I do this a lot in different countries that I visit, beyond the formalities and the institutional meetings I hold. I go to schools and I meet young people and I say, what is it that you expect from us? And first they are shy. First question I ask, how many of you will run for politics one day? Nobody puts up their hand. How many of you vote? 75% put up their hand. We then go into a discussion of around 45 minutes to an hour, where they discuss what our climate goals should be, what our protection of marginalized communities should be. I sometimes look back and I say, this is exactly what used to be discussed when I was a youth activist, fighting for my country to join the European Union. But today, the way information spreads, the importance of us to counter that narrative when it is so easy to say the opposite. When you run elections and you wonder how one sometimes blatant untruth can lead to an election result that is unthinkable. By the end of those 45 minutes, I ask again, how many of you will run for an election? I always manage to get 2 or 3 or 4, and putting up their hand. How many of you will vote? They all put up their hand. And that is what I think our biggest responsibility is today. If we want to be led by political representatives whom we believe in and whom, most importantly, we can hold accountable to and for the decisions that they take, so that when they come back in front of you and tell you to vote for them again, you can ask them, what have you done when you promised me 4, 5 years ago that you would fight for my cause? Too often, the answer doesn't come. And too often, that person leaves that room uninspired, without hope, and with the result that the people who will then take the decisions are not decisions that represent him or her. I think that is what our biggest responsibility is today. I think that is what we need to be able to answer, no matter how critical, no matter how difficult the questions are, and no matter how unpopular a statement might be. But if it is the correct one, then you need to stand by it. Because history will prove you right, as history has proven our predecessors right. When we see such short-termism, when we see such populism, we see disinformation and manipulation propagate indiscriminately, and such woes are trickling down through our society. So my final words are, this is no time for complacency. I was asked yesterday by a journalist on the way into the summit, are you optimistic? And my answer was, I'm always optimistic. Cautious, but optimistic. Because we need to be able to believe, and we need to be able to keep hope and spread that hope for peace and justice that today we cannot any longer take for granted. So it is time for us to help guide the way to a solid path of reason and compassion. It is time for leadership and wisdom. Europe can always be more if we allow ourselves to believe in Europe's strength and in its virtue. Now is when we need to come together like never before. And it is for Europe, nobody else, to lead. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, szanowni państwo.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's quite extraordinary. We are quite on time. We are actually ahead of time.
W związku z tym,
And
panie redaktorze, zapraszam pana prezesa
may ask the president of KAI, the Polish Catholic Information Agency, to take the floor. He will moderate the first session. The floor will be yours in a moment. I understand that he will invite the other panelists. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you very warmly. In a moment, it is going to be my honor to start another item on our agenda. We will have a panel discussion. Church's stance versus the war in Ukraine versus the Russian aggression. We shall discuss the war in Ukraine, and we will also discuss the religious aspect thereof. May I ask our excellent guest, Evstachij Zoria from Kiyv. May I welcome you, sir, to join us.
I proszę bardzo, arcybiskup Zoria
Archbishop Zoria represents the Catholic Orthodox Church in Ukraine, and he is here with Epiphanius, who is the Kiyv Metropolitan Bishop and the head of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Welcome.
I obecność metropolity Epifaniusza nadaje szczególnego wymiaru naszej konferencji. Jest to jedna z pierwszych na tak wysokim szczeblu wizyt
is quite important because this is quite an important visit on his part. This is a continuation of an interreligious dialogue with the Greek Catholic Church, with the Catholic Church, and thanks to this conference it's an important opportunity to stay in touch with the Parliament, and the President of the European Parliament himself understands that they will be able to discuss things face to face. Archbishop Zoria is present here. Some information. So, he was born on the 21st of October 1977 in Cherkasy. And what does it mean? I'm not going to give you any more dates of birth, but what does it tell us? Today, we can wish happy birthday on his 45th birthday. And as we can see, our guest has chosen the royal city of Kraków to actually celebrate his birthday. And let us hear about the Archbishop, one of the most important members of the church, apart from its head, naturally, is with us. He's responsible for foreign contacts, and he is also the chief officer of this church. In 2008, he joined one of the religious orders, and at this point, he is the Archbishop of Chernihiv and Niživ. Welcome once again. And Ihor Shaban, father and doctor, could you please join us?
Ksiądz Ihor Shaban
represents the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. There, he presides over a commission dealing with the support for the unity of Christianity. He works at Portal, and he sits on the Council for Religious Freedom. He has a PhD in ecumenism. He is one of the most important experts in this field in Ukraine. He studied here in Poland under Mr. Hryniewicz, who is one of the best and most eminent theologians. Father Shaban teaches theology in a number of places, in Lviv, at the Religious Sciences Institute in Kyiv, but also he's a host lecturer in Warsaw at a Jesuit college. Also, he is a parish priest in Borispol in Kyiv. Borispol is an airport that was heavily attacked recently by the Russians. Father Professor Marek Blaza is a Jesuit, a Polish Jesuit. Would you please join us, sir? He is bi-ritualist, so you say masses in the Western and Eastern rites. He is a very important Greek Catholic priest in one of the Warsaw Greek Catholic parishes. This is where he works. He's a habilitated doctor of theology, and he specializes in ecumenism, just like his colleague present here. He's also a professor teaching in Bobolanum in Warsaw. There he teaches ecumenical theology. He also teaches at a Catholic university in Lviv and at a seminary in Lviv. But also he teaches at the University of Warsaw. In a moment, I'll give the floor to our excellent guests. And let me reiterate here that we shall discuss the role of churches in Ukraine in the face of the ongoing war and the ongoing crisis. This role is, ladies and gentlemen, a truly special one. Now, some information. Just 3 minutes on the religious situation in Ukraine. Firstly, the Ukrainian nation, as you may know, but let me remind you, today is one of the most religious communities in Europe. And churches actually enjoy a huge support across Europe. It is quite unparalleled, so this is an important phenomenon. Mind you, this is a post-Soviet country that at a certain point in time had been subjected to atheization.
From our data, different data, sociological institutions tell us that out of 41 million Ukrainians, clear majority consider themselves Christian believers, about 62% Orthodox Church. As for Greek Catholics, more on this church somewhat later, about 10% of the society. Roman Catholics, about 2%, roughly more than 2%. Also about 2% belong to different Protestant churches. Now a few comments about the Orthodox Church in Ukraine. It's the largest, the most important church in Ukraine. We've got a representative here, representatives of this church, Archbishop Zoria and the Metropolitan Epiphanius, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. It used to belong to the Orthodox Church of Moscow. Now it's a separate church. Now the Church of Ukraine, maybe Archbishop Zoria will correct me, but 53% of people of Ukraine subscribe to this church. About 21 million believers are part of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. 7.5 thousand parishes, 120 monasteries, 60 bishops, 3 academies, and so on and so forth. But now going back to 2018, December, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine was set up. A month later, January 2019, from Bartholomew, it receives the Tolos, and this was a groundbreaking date in the history not only of Ukraine but the whole of Europe, especially Central and Eastern Europe. Let me explain. This so-called telos about autocephalous church, it means that the Church of Ukraine became independent as a church, again, Orthodox Church of Ukraine, independent of the Orthodox Church of Russia, independent after 330 years when it was part of the Patriarchate of Moscow. Now it becomes independent with direct links to Constantinople. This Church of Ukraine, is one of the largest Orthodox churches, I think second at the moment after Romanian, if not the first even. I think we'll find out more in a moment. I'm just mentioning the most important information. There is also an Orthodox church that is still part of the Moscow Patriarchate, is still in operation in Ukraine. How to characterize it briefly? Big structures, but diminishing, dwindling numbers of the faithful. 11,000 parishes, still part of the Moscow Patriarchate, but after the beginning of the war, only 4, even less, 4% of the population, about 2 million Ukrainians, identify with this Orthodox church that is still part of the Russian structures. More and more move to the separate, independent Orthodox Church of Ukraine. We also have here Ihor Shaban, who represents the Greek Catholic Church of Ukraine, about 4 million members, about 10%, plus about 1 million or more of Ukrainians living abroad. The Greek Catholic Church was set up as the result of the so-called Union of Brest, and the 19th century, let me stress again, this was the time when the Ukrainian nation was formed, roughly. The Galician Piedmont, as it was called. The Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine was very much responsible for the creation of modern national identity of Ukrainians. Huge authority still very much felt in Ukraine, and especially Archbishop Shevchuk, head of this church in Ukraine. I'm slowly finishing. In Ukraine also for ages we've had the Roman Catholic Church active, so-called Latin Church, as it is called there. It's not a large organization, about 1 million faithful, about 2% of the overall population. Quite many of them are Poles or descendants of Poles living in Ukraine, with Archbishop Mokrzycki, Metropolitan of Lviv, heading this church. Very brief general introduction into the discussion, and now, if you allow me, I will join our panelists. There is a separate microphone waiting for me. Right, I don't need to take this one. Ladies and gentlemen, we have some time on our hands. I understand we can speak until 2:30 actually. So if I may, I'm going to make a few introductory remarks. I hope that there is going to be also time for discussion, questions from the room, so that we can actually learn even more about the religious situation in Ukraine and the huge role that Christian churches play in Ukraine and also social life of this country. Let us start perhaps with the following issue. I will be asking some questions, asking for our panelists to refer to them. I have prepared the first introductory question. As I said already earlier, I mentioned this historic event 3 years ago. Independent Orthodox Church of Ukraine was created at that time. What, in your view, Reverend, what was the importance of this event for your churches? Archbishop Zoria, maybe first. And what is still now its importance for Ukraine and in general for the whole region of Europe? I understand I can speak Ukrainian, right? Yes, there is interpretation from Ukrainian available as well.
Ukrainian, and for those who need a translation, please. На відміну від структури католицької церкви, яка має глобальну єдність.
Well, as for the structures of the Orthodox Church, there is no equivalent to Roman Pope in the Roman Catholic Church. The Orthodox Church can be considered a community or a family of faithful. It's a family of independent, local Orthodox churches. Over the centuries, those local Orthodox churches is usually linked to two external factors. First of all, the national factor, the state-related factor. We all know that church has its dual nature. On the one hand, it is the body of Christ. It is a united spiritual community. On the other hand, just like a human has its soul and body, the Orthodox Church also functions in concrete conditions and is made up of living women and men living in different nations, in different national states, with their culture and tradition. So the Orthodox Church, let me repeat, is a family of local churches that are quite well integrated inside, and they have very close links to national and state identity of the place where they operate. It is quite a unique organizational form. When the Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople, the first of the patriarchs, he often stresses the fact that we are not a confederation, association of different organizations, but we are one Orthodox Church, although there are Orthodox churches operating in different countries. One Orthodox church, again I stress, with one tradition in liturgy, with many different elements that make us different from others. And also there are internal differences between the Orthodox Church, say in Romania or Serbia or Ukraine. Now trying to refer to the question that has been posed by our moderator, the event that he referred to, this important event when the Orthodox Church of Ukraine was declared independent, equal in its rights and dignity to other independent local Orthodox churches. This is, yes, quite a unique event, a very important historic event, not only for the church, but also Ukrainian nation. This can be compared to an event in which one's sovereignty has been confirmed. Unique identity of Ukraine as if has been confirmed. This is linked to the existence of a separate Ukrainian nation also, and a separate Ukrainian state that was created as the result of the will of the Ukrainian people. Not temporary, not accidental, but something permanent, something fundamental, very deeply rooted. And this is exactly what Putin is trying to fight against. Ladies and gentlemen, you certainly know that in the different interventions of Putin, when he speaks about history of Europe, his convictions are very much about the fact that the Ukrainian nation does not exist. That's what he says, and as there is no Ukrainian nation, there should be no Ukrainian state either. It is impossible to accept such a vision. Putin again sometimes says that it was just by accident that the Ukrainian state was created, and this can be changed easily. Putin sometimes claims that Lenin and Stalin actually contributed to the creation of Ukraine, and the existence of a separate Orthodox Church of Ukraine is a final confirmation, in a way, in a historic and religious way, of the existence of a Ukrainian nation, and at the same time it confirms the Ukrainian statehood. Let me stress again, in 1918, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine was not created. Those who heard about the independence of the church, the year 2018, only then this issue became well known. And this is roughly at that time that the Russian propaganda started speaking against this idea, saying that it was just a political project, a separate church of Ukraine. And the Russian authorities, also Putin, were trying to make use of this event. Again, I stress that the Russian propaganda is trying to prove that it was a political project, the creation of a separate Orthodox Church of Ukraine. But let me stress again, I referred to 1917, 1918. After the fall of the Russian Tsarist Empire, the church in Ukraine was trying to become independent of the Orthodox Church of Russia. So decades, it took us decades actually to become independent. This was a long-running project of the Ukrainian nation. I can refer perhaps to President Lincoln and his speech in Gettysburg, when he spoke about the government of his state. I think we can compare it to the government of Ukraine, the Orthodox Church that was created because there was a will of the Ukrainian nation to have their own Orthodox Church of Ukraine. We don't want to be a state church, of course. We, as the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, we certainly support the independent state of Ukraine. We support the Ukrainian statehood, as from the experiences of our whole history, we are convinced that it is the independence of Ukraine, and this has been confirmed by our experiences of the last 30 years. The independence of Ukraine is the condition for the freedom of faith and freedom of expression in our country, in Ukraine. Protecting our church, we are also protecting those important principles, also freedom of conscience of each individual. And the example of the war today in Ukraine shows to us very clearly what happens if the Russians occupy territories of our country in those areas that have been occupied by the Russian military. In Ukraine, there are attempts to limit many different rights, human rights, also the right of free conscience, freedom of speech. Sometimes actually the persecution is worse than it was in the Soviet Union. The occupied Crimea, incredible, when the Russian court intervened there in the region. Actually, letters were sent to parishes of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, where those parishes were required to dismantle churches that have been built in Crimea. The Russians in occupied Crimea said that the churches built by the Ukrainian church there were not built in accordance with Russian legislation. That's why they were supposed to be dismantled by the faithful in those parishes to dismantle their own churches. Can you imagine such a situation? Unthinkable even in the Soviet times. Hard to believe. Such events are happening in Russian-occupied Crimea. Only God, I think, has always known what the big trials of the Ukrainian nations were going to be. One of the elements of opposition to the Russian aggressors was linked to this process of the creation and the strengthening of independent Orthodox Church of Ukraine. We are united in our opposition to Russian aggression. It is very clear in our church, our parishes, our metropolitan Epiphanius already now stresses that we can be considered moral victors. Of course, we've not been able to prevail yet in a military sense or diplomatic sense, but one can already speak about the moral victory of Ukrainians, because all people of goodwill are siding with Ukraine, and this means that we are victorious.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam President, if I understand it correctly. So, Madam President will be back. Now, we will move on to something particular, to the direct engagement in the war, namely being with the society. And I mean how the churches represented here stayed with the society. It was a special mission in the war, a mission, a certain responsibility vis-à-vis the people, the refugees, those who fight in the front lines. What is this mission all about? The Greek Catholic Church, this is where we're going to begin. May I ask for 5 to 6 minutes? Welcome. I will try to speak Polish. I don't speak Polish too often, but I am your guest here, which is why I will try to speak Polish. Thank you for your invitation. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be with you and giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts with you. So, what is it that churches have been doing in this difficult time when we are being attacked by an aggressor that is trying to destroy us? In such a time, it is important for our church and other churches is to be with its own nation. It's quite straightforward, to be with their people. That is the slogan that we came up with, namely, churches should be with their people. Mostly it was about working with our faithful abroad. We're a global church, we have parishes all over the world, and those parishes, dioceses, are united in a single structure. At the time, nobody actually could predict how important this slogan would be for whole Ukraine, because it was quite natural to be with people at home. Being with people under occupation, though, it's a new thing. It is a special challenge. It takes courage to stay with people under occupation. It means that we need to fully trust God's love. You don't know what's going to happen to you tomorrow. Sometimes the presence of a priest is their last hope. And there were many such priests that did their duty in the east, in the occupied territories. Many people couldn't evacuate, and priests stayed with them, shared food with them. I know for a fact that in Kharkiv, our bishop is feeding at least 1,500 people a day. So basically, we have divided the territory of Ukraine into 3 zones where our church is active. The first zone is the hot zone of the occupation and the war zone. We have military chaplains there, but also the priests that stayed with civilians. Their presence is quite important there. First, it is about saving people's lives, feeding them, helping them to evacuate whenever it is possible. It is especially important in towns and cities that are besieged. I've experienced it myself. In March and in April, I could feel the breath of the Russian army. They were actually at Borispol, quite close. Secondly, we've got the second zone close to the military activities. People fleeing the war can stay there for a moment, grab a bite, have something to eat, something to drink, maybe change clothes, sleep and move on. In our church, the Greek Catholic Church, we have set up logistical centers in this zone. This is where we accept humanitarian help. There is this cathedral in Lviv, which is one of the logistical centers. And thirdly, we are active abroad, also here in Poland. There we try to help the refugees, to equip them with tools that will make them independent and will help them to survive. Now, let's talk about a foundation that we have started, Mudna Sprawa, a wise act. This is how you could translate it, and we have 3 projects that we pursue there. Firstly, food. The foundation has procured 40,000 such parcels, and it's quite helpful because it is enough food for 2 people to last for days. So 100,000 people so far has been saved, in a manner of speaking, thanks to the or because of the food that we have delivered. Buses is the second thing. You have volunteers and priests that go to Eastern Ukraine. There, they take people to safer regions, try to arrange temporary housing and satisfy their basic needs. Also, we have been cooperating with special parish havens, if you will. And thirdly, we are helping internal refugees. Here, we are supporting people both materially, financially, and psychologically. Thanks to Poland and other EU member states, it is easier to accomplish, especially in this third, safest zone. In our agency, we explain those moving addresses by Bishop Szewczuk, and he records those daily addresses that build people's hope and faith and help to find their way in this difficult situation and helps to find this Christian hope. So basically the same question. Archbishop Zoria has already started that, but would you please continue? The Orthodox Church in Ukraine has the strongest presence in central and eastern Ukraine, namely where actual war is raging. I have a friend in this church. He is one of the chaplains working in the front lines, and he tells them unbelievable things. But could you tell us about what you do to respond to this challenge, namely war? So there are a number of important tasks that we are pursuing in the time of war. So firstly, it is spiritual help. No material help, no armor, no money will help if the spirit of a human being is broken. A human being needs to feel this inner need to fight. To fight and often to give up one's life. So there is the spiritual aspect of this fight, of this struggle. Hardly any institution can be as inspiring in this sense as the Church. And for that reason, since the very beginning, it is the most important thing for us. Prayers need to continue. People who are suffering directly because of the Russian aggression, those who live where missiles and rockets are being dropped, they need to hear the prayers, they need to know that the truth is on their side. It is also very important for the military personnel. Metropolitan Bishop has been actually conversing, talking with the military personnel who tell them about their experiences in the front lines, how they go through it, how they experience it, how they know that they are being prayed for. And here, let me say thank you to all those who joined us in our prayers in Ukraine and all over the world. This is a very important part of the effort to win. And another important thing is the humanitarian effort. It is what our church is doing as well as the Greek Catholic Church. We are making collections, gathering help. We are also working abroad. We are collecting money from our Orthodox brothers who have been sending help, significant help. Then we take all that, we divide it and pass it on. But also, we have been receiving help from various organizations, both religious organizations and non-religious organizations. Basically, our parish has become a humanitarian help center, you might say. Or rather, parishes, especially those that are located close to the front lines. For some time, for 38 days, Chernihiv was under occupation, it was attacked, we're being bombed, attacked with missiles. Then we had this room that was packed with help, humanitarian help. So despite everything that happened, this help reached us and then was passed on to those in need. For months, I couldn't even reach my own desk in my own office because there were so many parcels and so many boxes with help. It was aid aimed at both the military and the civilians. When it comes to the military personnel, material help matters, but another thing that matters is that people know about them, remember about them, and that are with them. Our church, jointly with Caritas, a Catholic organization, we have set up this organization. It's called Elias. Love. Sergei Dmitriev presides of this organization, and it's been quite active. It's been doing a lot to obtain help and then to share it with those in need. There is a number of special centers that are helping women who have been victims of violence. So they are being helped. We have another important project. We have module buildings being set up in occupied areas close to Hostomel, Bucha, and other towns and villages, because a number of settlements have been destroyed and people need a place to live. Let us remember, winter is coming.
Декілька десятків таких будинків, передав їх безпосередньо мешканцям, яким вони потрібні, і продовжує втілювати це в життя.
Many such buildings have been opened and we have been pursuing this project. We've been helping in reconstruction of buildings whenever it's possible. Chernihiv is a good example there, jointly with volunteers. This organization has been actually restoring those buildings, overhauling them. And we are already thinking ahead. We are already thinking about the future. As we have said, Ukraine will defeat the aggressor. We have already been morally successful, but we'll also be militarily successful. And what's going to happen is a period of reconstruction, material reconstruction and spiritual reconstruction. I believe that our church, our religious community, with our friends and partners, mostly in Europe, but other countries in the world too, will play a very important role. We have a very important task. To renew buildings is a simple thing, but to restore the souls wounded in war, that's going to be more difficult. Then we'll also be working with the military personnel, soldiers, that will return from the front lines and they will be traumatized. It's difficult to imagine that. But those people have been through bombing, for example, even if it was a short incident. It is something that is traumatizing, and then later on in life they hear sounds that are similar, and all this trauma is brought back. It's quite stressful. Now imagine the soldiers that are experiencing that for months at a time, all the time. Now the question is, how can they return to peaceful lives? How could that be possible without help? And this is another thing that is ahead of us. We're actually building our capacity to work with the families and with the military personnel. We've got our work cut out for us, just as Madam President, as Roberta has said, we are optimists. We have a lot of faith. We have hope, and we are trying to pass on this faith and this hope to others.
Thank you very much for the information you are sharing, but also your testimony. Very unique. Can I perhaps straight away formulate another idea? After listening to our speakers, you can clearly see how much the Ukrainians still need our support. Let us keep on assisting Ukrainians. It's a long-term project, and our partners in Ukraine can guarantee that our assistance, our help will be to great benefit of the population. Yes, please. Thank you very much. First of all, I wish to thank you for inviting me to join in. What an excellent group of panelists. Let me just add a few comments about, first of all, Greek Catholic Church and the Roman Catholic Church. We are working together with the Roman Catholics also as Greek Catholics. Let me explain what I mean. First of all, the Greek Catholic Church, after 2014, in the territory of Poland, quite a number of new parishes were opened up. The reason was that there were Ukrainians, many Ukrainians already at that time arriving in Poland. Then, as we know, the beginning of the conflict to Crimea, it was already 2014. At that time, these were mainly Ukrainians coming to Poland, looking for jobs, trying to earn some money. But actually, it's very good that they were already in Poland at that time, because in a way, people in Poland, Poles have grown used to having Ukrainians, more and more Ukrainians in our country here in Poland. And then with new Ukrainians, a big wave after the 24th of February this year, one may say that those Ukrainians who had been for a number of years in Poland, they started also helping those new refugees, the new arrivals who didn't know the language, didn't know quite to manage in Poland. They didn't want to learn perhaps Polish because they wanted to go back to Ukraine as quickly as possible. And actually, as the previous speakers said, we are doing exactly the same, trying to help those people, also support them in a spiritual way. The sacraments, confession. Most of the refugees, as you know, are women, mothers, sisters, wives of soldiers, many soldiers who actually were killed, many seriously injured, and their children. I'm never going to forget Easter this year. Those terrible scenes I witnessed in our church, especially women and children. Our parish also has a special storeroom where we collect food, where we collect clothing, both for Ukrainians who are civilians, but also for the military. We're trying to help them. We don't really ask anyone whether they are Greek Catholics or whether they are Orthodox. Whoever comes to us, whoever needs some assistance, also spiritual assistance, we never say no. Greco-Catholic bishops said very clearly that everyone deserves support. For those people, Church, Orthodox Church or Greco-Catholic Church is an asylum, a place where they are at home. And concluding Greek Catholic theme, our priests also had to learn new things in this difficult period of time. First of all, as you know, the dates of Easter are different, about a week's difference between Western and Eastern churches, Christian churches. Some of the Ukrainians were coming to Roman Catholic churches, asking for some food, actually, to be prayed over and sanctified by the priests of Roman Catholic Church. And different denominations shared some rituals. The Roman Catholic also makes it possible. Proselytism is of course banned, but if someone asks and someone would like to, if someone knows that the Orthodox Church is such that one can receive communion according to the rite of the Eastern Church, the priests of the Orthodox Church, I know, I found it out from members of the parish. Some say that Orthodox priests in Ukraine say that oikonomia is, in other words, tolerance is very much there. That in some cases, in the case of war, it is possible for Orthodox Christians also to receive communion from the Roman Catholic Church or Greek Catholic Church. It is possible in the Catholic Church. Supre Balex Sanus Animarum. There is also a reference. The highest law is the salvation of the soul. This is what matters. And one last thing, perhaps we run also special trainings for Roman Catholic priests, how to speak to Ukrainians of Orthodox faith. No one prepared us at our seminars. In the seminaries for priests, nobody told us how to help people who have witnessed crimes, barbarian crimes in the context of war. No one was able to prepare us to do that. We have to be there for those people. We have to listen more and say less. And if I may, let me suggest another, perhaps, subject for us to discuss, maybe one of the saddest elements in the context of this war. The reference, let me refer to the Russian Orthodox Church and its catastrophe at the moment, because the head of the church is the Patriarch Cyril, Moscow, who, again, let me use the language of journalism, he is as if committing suicide as the head of the Orthodox Church of Russia. Again, I'm speaking about the fact that the patriarch of this Russian church, he supports so much the regime of Putin and the military intervention in Ukraine. What is even more, actually, he makes this war in Ukraine almost holy war, like the holy war of the Russian Orthodox Church. This dimension, as if, apart from the Russian imperialism, I think there's this additional fuel, and ideological fuel for this war. What do our guests think about this sacred, almost, character of the Russian war against Ukraine? What is the future in such a situation, in your view, of the Orthodox Church of Russia? Both within the territory of Russia, but also in Ukraine. As you know, there are still some members of this Russian church present in Ukraine. What is your view about the future? What can happen, in your view, in the next years? What is going to happen from your perspective? What is the possible evolution of the Orthodox Church of Russia? Maybe Archbishop would like to take the floor as the first.
Це дуже гарне питання. Питання дуже важливе.
Thank you very much for your excellent question. Very pertinent question. Very topical, yes. Well, for us, for the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, as an independent church of the Kiyv Patriarchate, for us, what is very obvious, very clear, is the way we've been analyzing the different messages sent by the Church of Russia, and it was quite clear for us what the close links are between the Orthodox Church of Russia and the Kremlin. It's not only the case of the Putin regime, the current regime, but it's been going on for quite some time. The Orthodox Church of Russia, Moscow, since the very beginning, basically, of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, Ivan Kalita, the 14th century, roughly, I would say, so 4 centuries, then the Russian Tsars, the Russian Empire, then the Soviet state. Over the whole history, many centuries, there have been very close links of the Orthodox Church of Russia and the leaders of the state, the Russian state. The main objective of the Russian Church, Russian Orthodox Church, was not the service to the faithful or the state in general, but serving the leader, whoever it was at a given moment, the Tsar, the president. This is a long tradition, unfortunately, of the Russian Orthodox Church. Nothing has changed, it still is the case. There have been some exceptions, perhaps, in the history of the Russian Church, but they just confirmed this principle. Metropolitan Prokopovich, who spoke out against Ivan the Terrible and his terror, is one of those exceptions. He, unfortunately, lost his life as a result. He's been declared saint by the Orthodox Church, but unfortunately, the Orthodox Church of Russia does not follow this example. And especially now, the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church, Kirill, Patriarch Kirill of Moscow, is very much following this old tradition of serving the state authorities. Well, the Orthodox Church is a big world family. For a number of decades was divided. There were 2 approaches that have been personified as if by 2 centers. There used to be 2 big centers. The New Rome, as if Constantinople, and the New Rome, Moscow. Moscow, self-declared Third Rome. So those that identify with the Orthodox Church usually chose between those 2. The Orthodox Church as it was seen by the Patriarch of Constantinople and the one of Moscow. Of course, one tradition very much open to the world, to the needs of the people, looking at the common future. The approach of the Patriarch of Constantinople, while a very much different approach of the Russian Church, Moscow, going back to perhaps the Middle Ages, medieval traditions, imperial Orthodox Church. This was the approach of the Moscow Patriarchate, the type of the Orthodox tradition that focuses not on the future but on the past, that is not focusing on serving the faithful, but serving those in power in Russia at a given moment. Additionally, the crisis of the Russian Orthodox Church, in my view, is a logical consequence of such an approach. What we are seeing here is a repetition of what happened to the Russian Church after the end of the Russian Empire, the end of the Romanov dynasty. As you know, in 1918, the Russian Orthodox Church found itself in a new position, although the Church had a long tradition, long standing in Russia. It was always supporting the Russian emperors and found itself in a completely different situation in Soviet Russia. Now it seems that we are seeing a very similar situation. Unfortunately, the Church was not able to quickly react 100 years ago, and its importance diminished. And I think it's going to be similar this time, maybe not in the coming months or years yet, not with Putin as president and Kirill as the patriarch, but I think sooner or later the Russian Orthodox Church is also going to be renewed. I do hope this will happen in a free world. This has to happen. Well, but let us also remember that within the Russian Orthodox Church, we've got also priests operating in other countries. Unfortunately, too few of them protest clearly against the war, Russian aggression in Ukraine. In Lithuania, there has been a recent case where some of the priests were actually banned from the Russian Orthodox Church because they tried to protest against the Russian aggression on Ukraine. Similar situation in Estonia, because the idea is to simply replace the structures of the Russian Orthodox Church in some of those countries with the structures of Constantinople. I think the same is going to happen after the fall of the dictatorship of Lukashenko in Belarus, so that the Orthodox Church in our part of the world will become free at last from this narration of Moscow imperial narration or narrative of the Russian Orthodox Church. I think this is going to have a big impact on the Orthodox Church structures in those countries. We should not, of course, be saying that all members of the Russian Orthodox Church are pro-Russian and pro-Russian aggression, but the higher you go in the hierarchy, I'm afraid, the more clear it is that the patriarchs very much subscribe to the Russian view of the world. But again, in my view, it's going to change when the position of the patriarchs changes. We'll be able to speak about the renewal of the Russian Orthodox Church. We should simply focus on the very sources of our church, the very roots Kiyv, as you know, played the most important role in the Eastern Christianity over many centuries, and I think that we are now witnessing a situation in which Kiyv will be playing a more and more important role, while the role of Moscow will diminish. Thank you very much, Archbishop, for an in-depth analysis showing us, well, positive evolution that is likely to take place in the Orthodox Church, moving away from the Russian Orthodox Church tradition, imperial traditions, and the close links of the Church and the state. Can I give the floor to the next speaker? What is the perspective of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church? Well, I would like to start by saying that for quite some time, when we speak about the European aspirations of the Ukrainian nation, among the Russians, one could see, we've been observing a propaganda model saying that Europe is no longer Christian, while the Russian mir, the Russian world, just the opposite, is trying to keep traditional Christian values. These were the elements of the propaganda of the Russian authorities and the Russian Orthodox Church, as if opposition between Christian and European identities. The Russians would like everyone to think so. And now, going back to the war in Ukraine, over almost 8 months since the beginning of the conflict, it has become clear that the Russian mir, the Russian world, aims at the destruction of the statehood of Ukraine, uprooting Ukrainian identity, which also means uprooting of the European identity in Ukraine. The head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, said that the Russian invasion is a sanctified mission of the Orthodox Church. He actually started even comparing the actions of Christ, Jesus Christ, and the Jesus Christ, the victim of Christ, with the victims of the soldiers of the Russian army in Ukraine. On the 24th of February, it's not the Ukrainians who attacked Russia, just the opposite. It's not the Ukrainian rockets, missiles that damage, destroy peaceful Russian cities. In such a case, well, the Russians could be considered defenders of their faith, their state, their families, but the truth is very much different. There are no threats to Russia and Russian civilians at the moment. What is ruined is the districts of Kyiv, not Moscow. Buildings in Ukraine are damaged, with many people killed as a result. It's in Ukraine that the Russian army over the recent days started mass attacks of infrastructure, critical infrastructure, mainly energy infrastructure, leaving many people without access to power. In most cases, it means no access to water. It's in Ukraine that there are parents weeping over their killed children. According to statistics, over 418, according to recent data, children have been killed as a result of the aggression. Thousands have been seriously injured. And now this idea of the Russian mir, the Russian peace, millions of people, including children, today are forcefully deported into so-called filtration camps in Russia. Very strange in the contemporary world, speaking about infiltration camps. The main idea, of course, is to kill physically those who consider themselves Ukrainian. Even before the Russian invasion, the American intelligence told us that there is a list of intellectuals, Ukrainian intellectuals, who are to be physically eliminated by the Russians. and also the Metropolitan Epiphanius, the head of the Ukrainian Church, Sviatoslav Sevchuk, also the head of the Greek Catholic Church. Also many priests from both churches actually were on the list to be physically eliminated by the Russians. It's not surprising, therefore, that it's genocide. In our view, we can speak about genocide when we speak about the Russian aggression. No one, I think, in the 1930s, if he were to look at Putin's regime, he would clearly agree that it's a typical fascist regime. If we were to ask now about the way in which the Russian authorities were able to convince Russian civilians to participate in this genocide, the question is not very difficult. The propaganda of the Russian Mir plays the important role here. This is the ideological fuel of the war. The Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian state together are participating in mass killing in the name of this idea of the Russian world.
I think that Western politicians should be in no doubt. Numerous and diverse crimes committed by the Russians in Ukraine are a part of a systematic plan to commit genocide. We must stop this crime together. If we don't, future generations will find it difficult to understand why the democratic world just stood aside and allowed it to happen. Thank you. Father?
Pozwólcie Państwo, że ja
Ladies and gentlemen,
jako ktoś, kto się tym zajmuje, jako tak zwany ekspert.
Allow me to speak as the so-called expert.
Żeby nie przedłużać.
Yes, my address will be somewhat simplified, not to take too much time. So, the Archbishop talked about those two sides, Constantinople and Moscow. At times, they're called the Slavic and Greek sides, but at this point, this system doesn't correspond to the truth. So we heard about Middle Ages. I don't think it's the return to Middle Ages, but to the House of Romanovs. 1700, when Adrian dies, and then until much later there is no patriarch. There is patriarchate, but patriarchs are not there. It is the emperor that rules. And they have their own synod, headed by the chief. And basically, it is something that copies the Scandinavian system, and basically it is about controlling the church. Under Peter I, a number of orders were destroyed. Nobody talks about that. So what would be needed for a church in Russia to take place? First, the state would have to be changed. Yes, it is a bit of a Byzantine system, but it is, in inverted commas, a perfected Byzantine system. End of quote. So, some time ago, if an usurper killed the emperor, he would become the emperor himself, because this is what God wants. No democracy there for anyone. Democracy is devilry. What, you mean humans govern? No, it's God who governs, who rules. And then Nicholas II was killed, and communism came. It is God's will. So we pray for the communist authorities, because this is what God wants to happen. Yes, God wants the church to be persecuted. We cannot comprehend it. We can't understand it. It is a completely different approach to theology of power, because there, power comes from a different place. Don't expect any democracy to occur there at this point in time, at least. The whole mentality would have to be changed, both in the church and in the state. And also we heard from the words of the bishop, there were those moments where the church could be separated from the state. It was after the February Revolution, when after the October's Revolution, Patriarch Tikhon was elected, but he was quite soon arrested. And then another moment, Paimon died, and Alex II came over, and many people said this is an opportunity for a new thing, but it never came to be. And Kyiv's metropolis is represented here, and for a long time it was actually situated in the territory of the Polish Republic, or rather the Republic, and the king that ruled over this area was not an Orthodox person. So basically, those people, the system learned to coexist with somebody who was not Orthodox. It was not the case in Russia. You know, when a Pole was supposed to become the Russian Tsar, first he would have to have converted to the Eastern Rite. So this is a very important distinction. Thank you very much for that follow-up. I would like to break this logical order because Madam President is back with us. I've been warned that she might have to leave us before the end of the discussion. And something that needs to be said in her presence. The war accelerated the dialogue of the democratic Ukraine with the European Union and its candidate process. So what role do churches play in the process of integration of Ukraine with the EU? So what role can be played by the churches there? How do you see it? Yesterday, at dinner, our friend took note of something. In Epiphanius' address, there was this wish expressed to become a part of the European community, the European community, he said, rather than the European Union. And yes, we are talking about Ukraine's being a candidate and trying to join the European Union. Here, in this room, everybody understands that the European Union, it is one of many historical projects. Historical projects that aimed to integrate Europe. From history, we know that, yes, indeed, we live at a time when Europe cannot offer anything better, because the European Union is perceived as the best model. Surely, however, our predecessor, at an earlier age, consider their own models to be optimal models that guaranteed progress. What else out there could there be? But after a time, another project, another model appeared that was better than the previous one. And at this point, we believe that in future, Europe can actually come up with an even more perfect model, better than the current European Union. So we are talking about our unity with the European community, and by this we mean something that does not change with the changes in the current political model. So Ukraine has made a European choice, and that choice has its roots. This choice This European choice is rooted in the fact that in 1988, Ruthenia was basically baptized. And we personally believe that this act was an act where we showed that we consider ourselves a part and parcel of a broader European civilizational space. And this Byzantine model remarks were actually mentioned here, and they are quite justified. And yet, please remember, this Eastern Roman Empire was a continuation of the Western Roman Empire. This Eastern state continued a certain European tradition. Constantine the Great, the emperor that founded the Constantinople, was announced to be the emperor in England, in York. So you saw this first integration project. You had this space that stretched from Constantinople all over to York. And yes, we are a part of a greater European community, European family, and as such we will do what we can to support our nation and our church in those aspirations. This is what we did in 2013. This is when the accession agreement was being discussed. This is what we did then, and this is what we're doing today. Just like any other European nation, we have our own remarks concerning the European Union. There are certain things that we accept and other things that we criticize. But this is exactly what the model is for. It's a model that is about unity and diversity, unlike the Soviet model where everybody was supposed to be the same. So in this model, we are a community, and yet we may, each and every one of us, remain ourselves and combine our personal identity with the identity of our nation, the national identity, and combine it with the more general European identity. It is something that we believe in. We are optimists in this regard. We believe that the current crisis is a crisis, but it is a crisis that is going to be an impetus. We do not believe ourselves to be prophets. I do not try to predict what the future holds. However, what we discuss at any conference is certain values that support us in this in this journey of ours, and we don't know where this path leads. We know what our principles are. We know where we're headed. And thus, we believe that we can overcome any misfortunes that might happen on our path. Our choice needs to be a free one. We need to move forward. We must not move back. Just like Abraham was called by the Lord to the promised land, he didn't know where he was headed, did he? He just followed his calling, and he became the father of all the faithful. And this is something that we believed in. We believe in this future, and we will struggle together, and we shall overcome together. Thank you very much for these words. And they bring us hope. They bring us hope, and at the same time they respond to the deepest aspect of this conference that has been organized for over 20 years, namely the role of the Church in the process of the European integration, including the Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Father Ihor Shaban, on behalf of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Father, I think there is no doubt about the fact that the Ukrainian nation desires freedom and desires to be with other free nations. We have this national need to be free. We want to be free. And this yearning is very important for Ukraine today. Freedom cannot be taken away from a human being. It is something that rests within. This freedom can only be freely given to somebody else. Alternatively, you can fight for this freedom, which is exactly what the Ukrainian nation is doing today. We are not shirking our responsibility. We have the courage to be a free nation, and we want to be a free nation in a community of the free European peoples. Here, at this point, I would like to say a few words about the Ukrainian churches. It's about. So let us, if it's all right with you, could you please focus on the European Union? It is something that has already been covered very well. Archbishop Szewczuk would, I understand, say the very same thing. Father Marek, could you add something to it? I will just say this one thing. Ukrainians living abroad, especially in Europe, support this project. They want Ukraine to join the European Union. It stems from the fact that this is a war of two different civilizations. It's something that I've already mentioned. Two different visions. Recently, we have seen a huge metamorphosis that the Ukrainian nation has undergone. Many people have been changing the way they see the world. Increasingly, they see that the European Union is the future, the EU with its unity and diversity. Epiphanius never used the word Eurosayus. He said Europejska Wspólnota. Eurosayus, it brings to mind the Soviet Union. So Epiphanius used a different expression to move away from words that make you think of the Soviet Union. And even in the words, in the language, can you see the change? And it's a change that needs to be appreciated. It needs to be appreciated in the European Union because this change is ongoing. Naturally, Russia is trying to present Ukraine as a place where terrible things happen. Or rather, they are trying to show the EU as a space where terrible things happen. This is what the Russian propaganda is trying to sell to Ukrainians, but we can see that Ukrainians increasingly tend not to believe that propaganda. Thank you. Let us move to something else. We have covered the EU and Brussels. Brussels is a major actor in the EU, but Vatican is another actor in Europe, a major one. So let us move to the Holy See and the Holy See's relationship with the churches in Ukraine. So, Archbishop and you, fathers, how do you perceive the Vatican's policy vis-à-vis Ukraine at this stage of the war? And another question, where do you think this policy should head? You know, the question is whether this policy should evolve or not, and if so, in which direction?
Thank you very much. Well, a number of questions have been posed The former questions were perhaps easier. Now, with those questions, I think we will have to be more diplomatic, finding answers to those questions. Well, let me assume again that the participants of this conference probably do not require very lengthy explanations to make my message clear. Well, when I was introduced as a member of this panel, it was said that the Orthodox Church of Ukraine is one of the largest churches. Father Ihor, I think, is a better specialist than myself, but after the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church came up with a number of mechanisms, practices of ecumenical nature, those that concern the perception of dialogue of the Catholic Church with the other Christian communities. Of course, being aware of the differences between the different Christian churches, their practices, traditions. Now, decades later, there are certainly still separate traditions, and we do not expect anything more from the Catholic Church, anything more than equal treatment by the Vatican. We want to be treated exactly in the same way, we as the Ukrainian Church, to be treated just like other Orthodox churches. We do not expect to be holding any special position in the cooperation of different churches. We, at the same time, do not want to be omitted or pushed out of the cooperation of the Catholic Church with Orthodox churches. We have to remember about the importance of Ukraine at the moment. I think it's in Ukraine where not only our future is being decided at the moment, but the events in Ukraine are going to be decisive for the architecture of Europe and the world for coming decades, very clearly, if not for centuries. So, in my view, this collective security system in Europe, if it's not going to function properly, if it's not going to succeed in Ukraine, then in other places of the world, if there are tensions, there might be, unfortunately, I'm afraid, different conflicts arising. What can we, well, expect, for instance, if Chinese People's Republic, if they were to decide, for instance, to try to invade Taiwan? What would happen in such a situation? Well, what if Iran gets access to a full-fledged nuclear bomb? Will the international community be able to convince any country that has access to nuclear weapons to resign from, actually, their nuclear ambitions? As you know, Ukraine used to have nuclear weapons, and we agreed, actually, to become a non-nuclear state. And you see the consequences with our neighbor that threatens to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine, a former state that was in possession of nuclear weapons, but decided to resign with international guarantees. So I think the situation is very complex. We very often hear the words of Pope Francis when he speaks about peace. I think it's very clear that peace is of key importance for Pope Francis. We heard the comments that using nuclear weapons is not moral. But in the morning when I was walking along the Vistula River here in Krakow, coming back to the hotel, I saw a building. I'm not sure actually what the building is, but on the facade, I saw words, if you want to have peace, you have to get ready for war. I think those people from Krakow know this is a Latin sentence. And people of Krakow know which building it is, that, yes, if you want peace, you have to get ready for war. And very often, some people believe that this motto justifies the policy of aggression. But when you think deeper about this Latin motto, I thought that, well, if you really want to live in peace, you simply have to be ready to defend peace, to fight for peace if there is an enemy that poses threat to peace. But, well, if there's a serious enemy, words might not be enough. It's not enough to talk to the enemy and convince him to stay in peace. But, well, today we would like the Vatican to again see us directly, not in the light of somebody's words or through our relations with others. Again, I stress we are an independent, unique nation, and our church, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, is a separate sovereign church, and we would like to be seen through the prism of other churches or other nations. We want to have good direct relations with the Apostolic See. Hopefully, sooner than later, good, strong relations will be established. As you know, we have not been officially yet invited to such cooperation, as if we've been ignored so far by the Vatican. Hopefully, the Vatican will soon realize that there is a church called the Orthodox Church of Ukraine very soon. Well, I do hope that those words will also reach Rome, the Vatican. Reverend Ihor, yes, the same subject. Thank you very much. I think that in Ukraine, as for our expectations, as for the Vatican, I think that the first expectation is for the Vatican simply to have an impartial outlook on the war in Ukraine. Since the beginning of the Russian aggression, a lot changed in the Vatican as for the understanding of the reality of this war. At the beginning, it seems that the universal approach dominated, humanitarian, spiritual, but in late March, the Pope very clearly defined this conflict as a war. And since then, I think there is no ambiguity in the comments of the Vatican when we speak about what really happens in Ukraine. There are words used, barbarian war as a source of humanitarian crisis, catastrophe at the scale of the whole civilization here on the earth. Such quotations. Let me also refer to the comments of some others, not the Pope only, but also others responsible for the position of the Apostolic See, especially three important cardinals: Richard Gallagher, secretary responsible for relations with different states. He very clearly said that there is support of Kiyv by Rome and the right of Ukraine to defend themselves against the enemy. Another secretary, Cardinal Parolino, in May, referring to the teaching of the Catholic Church about the just war, he said that there is the right to militarily defend oneself in the case of an aggression. That is why other countries should actually send weapons to Ukraine to help it defend itself against Russian invasion. Prefect de Castelli, Kurt Koch, very clearly, in very clear words, criticized Kirill, the Patriarch of Moscow, calling his words heresy or false doctrine, that he's trying to legitimize absurd criminal war in Ukraine for pseudo-religious reasons. So it seems that the position of the Vatican is fairly clear today. However, apart from what I have just said, Ukraine also expects from the Pope an important decision about his visit to Ukraine. What is the news? Well, we do not have any news about the position of the Vatican, but still the Pope very clearly says he wants to be close and he wants to confirm this closeness to Ukraine, visiting Ukraine. But as we know, this is very much going to be determined by the physical reality and also the condition of the health of Pope Francis. We realize that he has some ailments to his leg, and the doctors will not be very happy about him traveling far. I still want to stress that his possible visit would be of great importance for Ukraine. Early this year, we spoke about the visit of John Paul II in 2001 to Ukraine. The visit of the Pope is quite different from the visit of secular heads of state. It can be compared to a pilgrimage. When John Paul II visited Lviv, he called himself Pilgrim of Peace. So such an event is always a very important event, spiritual event for us, bearing fruit for years later. So we do hope that if the visit of Pope Francis does take place, it's a visit of peace for us, for Ukrainians. Archbishop Zoria, a few minutes ago, pronounced very important words. Let me just quote very briefly about the future of the Orthodox Church in this part of Europe. He said that the main center of the Orthodox Church in this part of Europe in some time is becoming not Moscow, but Kyiv. Kyiv is going to replace Moscow as the center of Orthodox Church in this part of Europe. I think there is hope here, hope for dialogue, also ecumenical dialogue between the Catholic Church and Orthodox Church, because Archbishop Kyiv, it seems, is very much open to dialogue with Roman Catholic Church. What is your perspective here? Well, the word itself, dialogue, comes from Greek, as you know. Dialogue means the language of two. We need at least two to be involved in dialogue. Well, to make dialogue possible, you need to have two sides to such dialogue. Well, then again, I can simply repeat, it's not only for us to decide whether there is such dialogue in place in accordance with the documents that have been mentioned here and the principles of the Vatican. This dialogue has to be organized, and on our part, we see no obstacles to such dialogue. We would like the Orthodox Church of Ukraine to be part of the dialogue between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. Well, such dialogues, of course, has been taking place for decades in general between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. I also remember the visit of John Paul II to Ukraine, when there was a meeting between the Pope and the Orthodox Church, Patriarch Filaret at that time. In his intervention, he said that apart from the ecumenical dialogue that has been taking place for many decades, there is also another dimension of very concrete actions that can be taken here, practical ecumenism, if you can call it like this, where we have no differences, where there's nothing that differs us, or that those differences are very small. We can act already now and try to overcome divisions. So this crisis, well, shows us clearly that we did not need many conferences, many meetings to take decisions about what we can do for the refugees, how to assist them, for instance. There was no need for questions to be asked whether the help from Roman Catholic parishes, those collected in Western Europe or in Poland by Roman Catholics, whether those objects, this assistance can be granted to non-Roman Catholics in Ukraine. No such questions were posed. It was obvious. Roman Catholics helping Orthodox Christians in Ukraine. No limitations here. So, well, I think the dialogue is very much there. There have been also situations in which our priests who were hosted by colleagues from the Roman Catholic Church, simply some of them actually used common shelters, or they moved to safer places in Western Ukraine and were hosted by Roman Catholic priests. This is very practical ecumenism. This is where we are, I think, growing together, where we are working together towards better understanding of each other. Perhaps I will now give the floor to people in the audience. We've got experts in Ukraine, experts specializing in the Vatican, the European Union. One comment perhaps from me, and then I give the floor to those in the audience. This is something that has been mentioned already here before. Priest Ihor used the word reconciliation. And now, this is where I would like to ask my first question to everyone here in the room. Can we today speak about or think about possible reconciliation between Ukraine and Russia? You remember some reactions to when Pope Francis suggested the way of the cross with two women, one from Russia, one from Ukraine. It was about a possible reconciliation already at that time, but let me formulate this question in a slightly different way. Peace is needed before possible reconciliation. What conditions would be necessary for peace in Ukraine? Of course, what is the approach of the churches? When would peace be possible? And then the next question, the second question, can we start thinking, maybe we should already now start thinking, considering possible, in the long run, of course, process of reconciliation, Russian-Ukrainian? Well, maybe I will start because I mentioned reconciliation before. Well, the Christians, of course, must never reject the idea of reconciliation with the enemy. But, of course, the subject is an extreme delicate one at the moment. You asked about the possible conditions. Well, time, I think, plays an important role. When would this happen? Now, when we've got an active phase of military invasion of Russia in Ukraine, I think we should not speak about reconciliation. It's too early. For reconciliation, first of all, you have to live, you have to survive, first of all. Survive the attacks of the aggressor, the Russians, first of all. As our Patriarch Sviatoslav said, first of all, they have to stop killing us, because if they kill all of us, who can they discuss reconciliation with? It's only later that we can think about further steps. Reconciliation between people is a long process. There are wounds that have to be healed. The process is a very long-term one. If it's too early, if it's done too quickly, people are going to reject the very idea. The next stage is about making it clear who the criminals are, and without Nuremberg trials, we would have no reconciliation between Poland and Germany. In our situation, any possible beginning of dialogue about reconciliation between Ukrainians and Russians, I think it can happen only when we have an international tribunal that very clearly condemns the Russian aggression and the Russian ideology that led to it, and also condemnation of all crimes that have been classified as genocide in Ukraine. It's only then, when the Russian aggressor is clearly taken to court and made responsible, can we speak about the beginning of reconciliation. And this clearly is going to be a very long process, focusing on the victims of this unjust aggression. Thank you very much for your comments. I would like to address the same question to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine.
I'm not going to reiterate what's been said because I believe exactly, or rather, I share the previous speaker's views exactly. So let me tell you the following. 2018.
Було організовано низку конференцій, де якраз намагалися
Antoine Arjakovsky, an activist, organized a series of academic conferences. And jointly we've been trying to organize a series of discussions, lay people and religious people, people from all over Europe. One of those conferences was organized at a town very close to Paris. And one of the professors at this conference described her own family experience. This was an older person. So she said, this professor said, my father, she said, was a soldier, and he fought in a war. It was World War II. It was the Franco-German front, and my grandfather fought the Germans in World War I. That's what this professor said. And his father also fought the Germans in 1870. Or rather, to be exact, he fought the Prussians. So she said, my experience is it was really difficult to even discuss reconciliation with the Germans at the time. What he wanted, though, was his son and his grandson to become soldiers and continue this tradition and fight and continue to fight the Germans. And I think that this is something that is going to be quite relevant. We cannot change the past. We will do our utmost to win right now, for Ukraine to win right now. What we are after really is for the future generations not to be forced to fight in a Russo-Ukrainian front and yet again to defend our country from the Russian aggression. Now, the question is, how can it be achieved? It can be achieved only via a painful and lengthy process. And the Russian society and the Russian church first need to be transformed. Because at this point, it is an aggressive empire, and this needs to change. This state, this aggressive empire, needs to undergo transformation and turn into a modern state. Yes, it might be imperfect, but Russia needs to first become a country that is not a constant source of threat to others. So I've been listening to those two addresses, and I felt that we have a sort of a roadmap, under certain conditions, that is. So what do you think of that, brother? This process is going to be a lengthy one, but it may begin only after the war is over, and the conditions have been delineated by the previous speakers. First, we need justice. It is not enough for the war to end. Some people say peace at all costs. No, that makes no sense at all. Let's look at the Polish-Ukrainian reconciliation. This could be used as an example. It is something that I have seen for myself. You have children fleeing from bombs to Poland, and those children will remember the war very well. They will remember who was bombing them and who was helping them. I dare say that these children are the future of the Polish-Ukrainian reconciliation in actions. No academic, no theological, no historical conference will do as much. No, it is actions that actually meant something. Love is about actions. If you say that you love somebody, well, that's one thing, but it's actions that matter. Serbo-Croat War, 1992, at the time I was helping refugees in Zagreb from Bosnia-Herzegovina. I remember how it worked. It was the same mechanism. Families were split. I had this dictionary, but it was the wrong combination. And, you know, the customs officer would not actually talk to me. I had to make sure that I pronounced the words the right way, because the words were similar, so I had to make sure that I wouldn't use the other pronunciation. And I returned to Croatia 29 years later, and I see everything change. Yes, Croats and Serbs, there is no love lost between them, but the relationship has changed overwhelmingly. So things are possible, things can happen, but time is needed. Now, about Pope Francis. He's my frater. I am a Jesuit too, and I am obliged to defend the Pope, maybe not at all cost, but I'm obliged to do that, to defend him, to a reasonable degree at least. So, remember, there are Catholics in Russia too, and it's not easy for them over there. I have many Jesuit brothers who work there. There was this one case when one of them was actually called for an interview. He was American, by the way, and he was told that it would be better for you to leave the Russian Federation because something awful, something nasty might happen to you here. And the Jesuits said, it's good because at least they tipped him off, you know, because they gave him an opportunity to leave. And many priests were simply removed from the Russian Federation. So please keep it in mind. The Pope does keep that in mind. He remembers that any radical steps on his part might basically be met with certain political actions in the Russian Federation. So I'm not saying that... I will say that your defense of the Pope was not the greatest. Was it? But now, this is the time for questions. I saw somebody who wanted to ask a question. There was somebody with a mic. The mic will move around the room, so you'll have an opportunity to speak in a moment. I will use this privilege to speak as the first one. Constantine the Great. Glad that you have mentioned him. I wanted to ask about him, so now it's not going to be so shocking. My name is Jan Tymowski. I work at the European Parliament. Thank you to all the panelists for your testimony, actions before words. But what's also important, the president is already left, so an anecdote. Right after she returned from Kyiv, I thanked her in Strasbourg because on the 1st of April, on Friday, I saw her on the train to Kyiv. And I thought for a moment it might have been a joke, the 1st of April Fool's Day joke, but it wasn't one. So a question? Yes. But first an observation. A moment ago, I actually looked up when it happened. So you, sir, mentioned John Paul II, and we heard about two lungs of Europe. Many people in Europe still believe that it is our mission, this messianistic mission, to convert this rotten Europe. Unfortunately, in the Polish Church, the European Union is at times represented in a similar way, basically as Eurosoyuz. So it's an allusion to the Soviet Union. And some people blatantly are comparing the European Union to the Soviet Union. So you have those two lungs of Europe. Maybe John Paul II was a bit prophetic when he spoke that Europe will be whole when there are those two parts, the west and the eastern one. And now we see where the east that we were missing is. Just like it was at the beginning of Solidarity, it is in the actions that Christianity is actually manifested. And a provocative question, maybe it might have been a mistake. It wasn't the Constantine who decide themselves. You know, this alliance of the throne and the church, because there were those heresies, non-Catholic churches, and this Byzantine tradition that was taken over by Moscow and described later. So the question, was this alliance a mistake or not? And what action can be taken to overcome that? Who's going to dare to actually respond to that? I will dare, if I may. Firstly, East and West. In terms of Christianity, we have Greece and Cyprus and Bulgaria and Romania. These are Orthodox countries. So we are not talking about the first country where Orthodox Christianity dominates. Secondly, Greece, Sweden, the UK, they used to be in the EU. Those countries are, in a certain way, religious countries where the altar and the throne are combined. So I'm not saying that it is bad in and of itself. The question is about the kind of cooperation that you have. Article 22 of our Constitution stipulates that there is a certain autonomy of the state and the church. So it's a beautiful thing to be enshrined in the Constitution. The question is, how do you understand it? Here it is similar. The cooperation of the state and the church is not bad in and of itself. The issue is that you have a majority church in a given country, and this majority church may start cutting corners, take an easy way out, and get too close and cozy with the state. So in Ukraine, it's quite comfortable, because there presidential candidates will not be getting too close to Greek Catholic church priests, because the electorate will be too small. But if they choose a different church, maybe they will find it beneficial in terms of politics. So this type of an alliance is bad for the church. And you can see how bad it is. You can see when you look at Kirill and the Russian Orthodox Church. This is a very interesting question. There is no simple, straightforward answer to it. I cannot recall which conferences it was, but at one conference I had this thought. What is the main role of the church in a country? Well, if it was the church that mattered the most in the state, then the best country in the world would be the Vatican. On the other hand, what happens when you remove the church from the state completely? If this is the best solution, in such a model, North Korea would be the best model to follow, or other countries like that. You might know that under Rakoczy, Albania was the only country in the history of the world where in the constitution they had it enshrined that basically religion is banned. There was this article in the constitution, it said it's an atheist country and religion is banned. So you have these two extremes on this continuum. And when you see those extremes, you'll understand that for a country to grow, you need a model of cooperation. People need to cooperate. Under this model, you have different institutions in the public life, and they simply pursue their own roles. And you shouldn't go too far into any of these extremes. So, neither the state at the expense of the church or the church at the expense of the state should solve any problems. So, was it a mistake what the Constantine did? It was not a mistake, for one simple reason. Please tell me. How can we pass judgment on the reality of the 4th century being alive in the 21st century?
Ми навіть віддалено не уявляємо собі спосіб мислення людей, які жили в той час. Ми маємо певні історичні факти. Ми щось собі будуємо.
It is something that we cannot even imagine. We are looking at historical facts, and we have a picture of the past, but it's just an image. Now, let's look at my own life experience. You know what is happening in Ukraine, but you are experiencing it via the media. I have to tell you that it's an experience. How can you pass this experience of yours to a person who is on the front lines? So, sharing information at times is insufficient. Now we are living in a certain modern reality. At the same time, somebody is dying somewhere. We are having this conversation, and somewhere else, people are trying to run for their lives because they are fleeing the war, because they are running away from bombs. So how can we actually judge what was special for that era? At the time, it was the right decision. And let me thank you for birthday wishes. We have things that are linked to childhood, like our clothes, and they bring back good memories. Naturally, also, when I was a child, those clothes, those garments were regular things that I just needed. If you try to put on these clothes right now, you would look really funny and quite ridiculous. Thank you very much. Andrzej, yes, you are already in the queue. The Pulaski Foundation. I represent Pulaski Foundation. Because of the war, sacrum is mixed with the profane. So my question is linked to what was already discussed. The role of the Russian church in this war. It's a shame that the representative of the European Parliament is not longer with us. So we've heard that today we cannot find representatives that would speak against it, so the profane needs to do the work. Maybe Russia should be defined as a terrorist state. Maybe this could be an answer, a response. Estonia has actually done that. There was a resolution in the European Parliament. It was put forward. Let's be honest. The Russian Church is not an independent institution. It is something, it is basically one of the actors in this war. So a question to the panelists. What about such initiatives? So, could we actually force the Russian representatives abroad to act in this way? Security is an issue. It's not only drones that are flying next to critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure, Norway, for example, but also the Moscow's church has started buying land there. So a question to you. What do you, dear panelists, honorable panelists, think about such actions? What could lawmakers do in the EU and in the EU member states?
Делегація Всеукраїнської ради церков в червні цього місяця під
The delegation of the Ukrainian Churches Council has received assistance from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, and we have paid a visit in Brussels. Unfortunately, personal sanctions were not approved. I mean, sanctions against Kirill, the Russian Patriarch. We have talked to a number of European Parliament members, and basically you've heard that Hungary was the only country that did not support this motion, and then Hungary, yet again, were responsible for removing Kirill from the list. Their explanation was that representatives of churches should not be sanctioned. In such situations, I try to argue, namely, the European Union imposed sanctions on three categories of people. Those that are officials, that are directly related to the regime, ministers, and others. So the second category are oligarchs, those that own a lot of money because Putin allowed them to. And yet, those people have to use this money to finance certain activities that are desired by Putin. The third category are propagandists. Those propagandists use the media to pollute, to infect people's minds using the old media. Kirill represents all of these three categories. First, he has an official role, he's an oligarch, and he is a top-level propagandist. So should he be covered by sanctions? Well, I say 3 times yes. Now, let's look at the 19th century. Nicholas I was the Tsar back then. The Russian imperial law actually included a special formula. So there was this formula. So there was the special office for Orthodox Church issues. And the Moscow's Patriarchate is something like that, effectively. It is not a religious institution. It is not something that could be compared to the Vatican or the Polish Bishops' Conference or the Canterbury. No, it is not. It is a part of the Russian authorities, a bit like the Minister of Defense. People are employed there to pursue Putin's policy. They are actually effectively officers. In the Russian Orthodox Church, they have effectively officers. They don't wear uniforms, or rather they wear uniforms, they just look different. So this is a kind of a cancer, it's a tumor, and needs to be resected. The sooner it is removed from the Russian society, the sooner the situation improves. So the Moscow's Patriarchate as a structure, a command structure in power, it is one thing, and the Russian Church as a community is another thing. The community of the faithful has been there since the Middle Ages, ever since the state was set up. Now, the structure it was set up later, controlled by the Tsars and then by Stalin.
So I think this heritage of the Soviet past, they have to be simply get done with. We have to remove them. I think this was one of the best analyses of the place where the Moscow Patriarchate is, its position within the state. I got the following proposal. One final question, because the lunch is almost ready for us. I don't think I've ever been before at the conference where everything is on time. Congratulations. Mr. Andrzej Grajewski from Goście Dzienne Weekly. Yes, please. Thank you very much. I would like to raise the issue of the Polish Orthodox Church in the context of the war in Ukraine, because as we speak about the position of different churches with regard to Russia's aggression against Ukraine, we should, being in Poland, raise the issue of the Polish Orthodox Church, because there are, I think, very clear dimensions here, also political, social, church-related, because a number of refugees from Ukraine, a number of them belong to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and in the current situation, being here in Poland, well, the priests of the Ukrainian Church, they are not allowed in Polish Orthodox churches belonging to the Polish Orthodox Church. They are not able to celebrate the liturgy, and the faithful, the refugees, if officially they say they are part of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, they are not allowed to receive the Holy Sacraments in this church. This is a serious problem. I spoke in the morning to the Metropolitan of the Ukrainian Church, Epiphanius. I asked about the letter to the Metropolitan Sava of the Polish Orthodox Church, asking for a solution here. The Metropolitan told me that no reply has been received of the Polish Church, Metropolitan. So this is something we have to raise very clearly. Poland is supporting Ukrainian refugees, and some of the refugees from Ukraine actually have no access to pastoral care because of the position of the Polish Orthodox Church. There are no problems with Greek Catholics, because the structure is there, operating. It's part of the Catholic Church, of another liturgy. In a number of cities where there were no Greek Catholics, now they are very much welcome. Also in the Roman Catholic churches, they might be given a separate chapel to celebrate the liturgy. No problem at all. In my city, we're also helping Orthodox faithful, where there is a priest coming celebrating the liturgy. But there are not enough priests. There are many for Greek Catholics, not enough for Ukrainian or general Orthodox Church. So the arbitrary decision of the heads of the Polish Orthodox Church, Metropolitan Sava, as a result of this decision, priests from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church are not allowed to celebrate liturgy for refugees, and also the refugees themselves have no access to sacraments. What to do in this context? Thank you for this question. Very serious matter. I will just add, Metropolitan Sava invited me for coffee about 3 weeks ago, and I asked him maybe he would like to come here to Krakow to meet the Metropolitan Epiphanius. And he said, no way, he's secular, he's not a priest, he's secular, it's not a church, the Ukrainian church. This is the position of the Polish Metropolitan. Now, someone more competent to speak on this. Thank you very much. It's extremely serious for us. Issue of basic importance for us. We were doing our best trying to solve this problem in the spirit of brotherly love and respect also for the canonical structure of our churches. Also the position here, the position of the Polish Orthodox Church, independent or Polish Orthodox Church. Well, because of this position and the choice of the head of the Polish Orthodox Church, Metropolitan Sava, his position has been presented here already. Well, let me go back to what I started my presentation with. There are two different approaches to the future of the Orthodox Church in the world. And those speaking about the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, there are two positions in the Orthodox world. One position is such, it is taken by those who refer to the position of the Moscow Patriarchate, and the other position is this represented by the Patriarch of Constantinople. If Archbishop Sava here says that we are not part of the Orthodox Church, why does he choose to opt for the Russian Moscow option, not Constantinople option? Why are representatives of the Russian Orthodox Church invited to Poland? At the same time, the Polish Orthodox Church believes that the Patriarch of the Ukrainian Church is a secular person, not a priest. What can we, or how can we actually be involved in dialogue in such a situation if we are not treated as partners for discussion? What can we do? Well, one can have, of course, different positions to speak, be involved in dialogue, but it's very much different. If you have this attitude, the one presented by Primate Sava of the Church of Orthodox Church in Poland. It's like Putin speaking about Ukraine. There is no Ukraine, no such state, says Putin. There is no Ukrainian Orthodox Church, says the head of the Orthodox Church of Poland. It's a make-believe church, he says, set up by the Western countries. We will do our best to get rid of this church. Primate Sava, well, does he want the Orthodox Church of Ukraine to disappear? We are not going to disappear, no. Metropolitan Epiphanius, myself, we are not going to disappear from the face of the earth. Not speaking about the whole current situation, political situation, you are very well aware of it here in Poland. But I think for Sava, his career, when you look at his career before becoming the Primate Metropolitan of Warsaw, well, those who know more about it might perhaps find justifications for his current position. Well, the Polish Orthodox Church has a clear position on our church. We have created a special group of priests to act abroad outside Ukraine. We normally, of course, encourage them to work together with the local Orthodox Church, where such church is in operation. Where it is, of course, possible, we encourage our priests of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, to work together with other Orthodox churches abroad for the sake of the refugees, for Ukrainians there. But where the competent church does not want to have any cooperation, we will be simply organizing it on our own, again, for the sake of the faithful. For the refugees, it is more important for us than maybe the letter of law in this case. This was very clearly formulated by my colleague sitting on my left, the Jesuit priest. Well, as the consequence of this, today, again, let me sum it up, the faithful of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine actually were pushed out or pushed to the Greek Catholic priest, because if they are told by the Orthodox Church that they are part of the schism, they want to have access to sacraments, but actually they can only join communities of the Greek Catholic Church, not Orthodox Church in Poland. But there are some communities being created, among others in Poznań. Archbishop Gondecki agreed for such a community to be set in a Catholic church, Jesuit church. Priest of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church celebrates liturgy, but also mentions in the liturgy the Archbishop Sava from Warsaw in the spirit of unity. But you know already the position of Primate Sava here. Well, if I may still from this perspective, very briefly in Ukrainian now, I would like to say that the Greek Catholic Church is doing its best to be together with the Ukrainians. Also here in Poland, as you know, there are many Ukrainians, so we are trying to be here with them, for them. Those who contact us, we know that they need our care, our support, and they realize that if there is no support of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, we are supporting them, helping as much as we can. I've got such a small publication, a booklet that describes the Greek Catholic Church, where we state very clearly that we are not going in any way to be involved in discussions between different Orthodox churches. We want everyone to live in the spirit of love, in good relations. We want, on our part, to take care as much as we can of the people who need support. So our structures in different countries, simply they're open to refugees. We want to support Ukrainians if there is such a need. We will continue, of course, such work, but it's not our initiative. Simply people are asking us to support them. One more comment, if I may. We are very grateful to the Catholic Episcopate of Poland, because we are seeing plenty of support from the Roman Catholics in Poland, and this is what we are not getting from the Orthodox Church of Poland. There are many examples, some of them have been mentioned here. There are certainly more. This, unfortunately, is the case in which actually for us, for the Orthodox Church, we are getting support from Catholic bishops. If there are people asking for support, Catholic bishops are doing their best to help, giving access also to rooms, to churches, so that Ukrainian refugees can participate in religious life here in Poland. School classes are organized. This shows, I think, practical ecumenical work here in Poland, so important for us. very precious for all of us. We are very grateful for that. We are very happy that such support is granted, very often in spite of protests of Metropolitan Sava of the Polish Orthodox Church. Why is not he acting and his church is not acting? Why many actually who are not part of the church, Orthodox Church, why are they working for Ukrainians and the Polish Orthodox Church is doing very little? Simply those who do it know what solidarity and Christian values is. Well, I'm afraid we have to be finishing soon. It looks like there's one, perhaps last question. Well, some form of conclusion to what has just been discussed. In April, there was a problem. We wanted to organize some support for people from Ukraine, Orthodox people from Ukraine, so that they can also participate in liturgy. I contacted Sosnowiec priest Mikołaj. We wanted to organize in Gliwice a small chapel for the Orthodox. I asked whether he would be willing to help us. At the beginning, he was very cautious. Then he probably contacted his superiors, and he said there is no way, no possibility of helping the faithful from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Poland. 2 months later, I phoned him again, and he said maybe he would be able to help. Why am I saying that? Well, maybe simply at the top, very top of the Polish Orthodox Church, the bishops are politicians in a way. Let's put it like this. But the priests at a lower level here in the parishes, even if they are part of the Polish Orthodox Church, they simply realize what the needs are, and they are supporting also Ukrainians. Because there in Sosnowiec, I asked actually the priest whether there are more people participating in liturgies in his church. We actually visited them, and with my wife, I was participating in one of the liturgies, and actually the church was full. There are now more and more people participating in Orthodox liturgies in Poland. So I think that priests, Orthodox priests in parishes, they are, I think many of them at least, are helping refugees, taking good care, giving sacraments to Ukrainians, although there are unfortunately some conflicts between churches at the top level. Thank you very much for this testimony. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It is time to conclude. It's just a short comment, yes? Yes, you are right. It's not just a case of hierarchy. There are many priests who are helping, but it's also very much about the language that is used in the church. In the Polish Independent Orthodox Church, very often the language is used with Russian pronunciation. Clear difference. Plus sermons, not always in Polish, sometimes in Russian, some in a mix of Polish, Russian, or Belarusian, Russian, and Ukrainians often say, no, this is not where I want to go. So you have to be aware of this challenge as well. Thank you very much. Let me conclude thanking most cordially our guests, our speakers. I wish to thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen. It took us 2.5 hours to discuss such important issues, and I'm very happy nobody left the room. That's really impressive. Divine blessing to Ukraine, and thank you very much for your testimonies, for your everyday work, especially because Ukraine is becoming as if a spiritual, important place for all of us in Europe. Thank you very much. I understand now the organizers of the conference take over. Another comment, at 2:30 there's a press conference, level 3, a small room for press conferences. You have to go first, actually, downstairs, and then another staircase up to the 3rd floor. Let me explain technical comments. When leaving the conference room, please take all your things with you.